Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar with Reinteractive. So my name is Errol, and I'm the CEO of Reinteractive. Reinteractive is, of course, a software development company. So we specialize in a number of things, including Ruby on Rails and Heroku, and in particular, AI technology as it's advancing into every part of business life at the moment. It's very important that we understand it and can use it correctly in a business environment. So that's really what we're going to talk about in today's webinar. There's going to be plenty of time at the end for questions and comments, and I want to answer as much as I possibly can. So hello everyone that's on board this morning. Great to see you all. So what we're talking about today is the training trap of AI. What does that mean? Why the training trap? Okay, so really we're talking about security implications of using AI and what that means to you as a business user. All right, so let's dive straight into that, First of all, I just want to start off with a few definitions, a discussion about some of the terms that you're going to come up with in AI. So the first one is, what is AI? So really, it's a very, very broad term, and it refers to any computer system that's designed to mimic human-like thinking in some aspects. So a computer algorithm, a computer program that's designed to respond and communicate in some way like a human. Now, that doesn't mean that it is human or that it's taking over humans. It just has a similarity. And that's what AI is today. Like, for example, if you type in something into a generative AI tool like ChatGPT, for example, you can ask a plain language question and you'll get a response that sounds sort of like it could be human. Not exactly though, because you can often look at it and go, yeah, no one would actually say that or phrase it exactly like that. Or if you're generating an image using an AI tool, you can often go, yeah, it doesn't look quite right. So there's this work towards making this more and more perfect as we move along. The next word that I want to define is generative AI. So generative AI is a type, it's a subset of AI applications that can produce a human-like response in the form of text, images, sound, or video from a plain language prompt. So that prompt is that thing that you type in that says, draw me a picture of a cat, or what's the weather going to be like in Melbourne today, or something like that. So that's the question that you ask it, and the response that you get is called generative AI. So what it's doing is it's generating something that is designed to mimic how a human might respond to that question. And like I said, there's a bunch of different media. So it could be text, it could be image, it could be sound, or it could be a video. Next one I want to define, getting a little bit more technical here, but stick with me. It's neural network. So a neural network is a series of interlinked pieces of information that is designed to mimic the way we believe a brain works. So this doesn't mean that the computer algorithm, that neural network, is in fact human or alive or a real brain. It's not. We just have this understanding of how we think a brain and different neurons in the brain might work together. And so we develop a computer program that mimics that, and that's called a neural network. And what a neural network is able to do is, with separate pieces of information, be able to link them in ways that that are very, very complex to come up with a response, so that if I ask a particular question, it knows what to say. I won't go into that in a lot more detail. That's maybe another subject for another day, but I just want you to know that this thing exists. So just going into that a little bit further, neural network is the process by which a generative AI model learns. So it learns by putting together these neural networks. So it does it by going over training data. So it reads, let's say it's a page out of a book or a website or something like that, and it goes over it many, many times. And what it does is it tries to predict what the next word might be in a sentence. So it's got a sentence, might be the cat. And so it knows that if it sees the word the, there's a good chance that the next word should be cat. And that's how it starts to learn, and that's how it starts to mimic our language. So imagine then doing that not with just the next word, but the next sentence and the next page and the entire book eventually. So with the right prompt, how would it come out with something? And what it's trying to do is it just keeps going and going until the output that it creates is similar to the actual thing. So we don't want it to be exactly the same because we don't want it to reproduce exactly what's there, but we want something similar. So it seems like it's correct. Deborah just asked the question, how is generative AI different from regular AI? So regular AI is the subject that encompasses everything, and generative AI is a subset of that. So you can imagine generative AI at the top, and then underneath that regular AI or AI is at the top, and then generative AI sits underneath that. That body of information, that neural network that's put together that can then predict what the next word in the next sentence could be, is called a large language model. A large language model is able to accept plain language inputs and turn it into some other type of media, basically. So that's what a large language model is, and you'll hear that term used throughout AI, an LLM. So typical types of LLMs might be OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, and you can probably think of a few others. Like there's various ones that are on the market that are freely available, and they're there for all of us to use. So they're the basic terms. As I said, don't want to go into enormous detail on all of those because I don't want to make these overly complicated, but I think these are worth diving into in a lot more detail. Next question then is, how does an AI tool learn? Okay, so what it does is it goes over and over a particular piece of information many times over until the predicted output closely matches the actual output. Okay, so let's just do a real fast example of that. So let's take the sentence, the cat sat on the mat. So if I was to ask the generative AI, what did the cat sit on? The large language model already has all this information about what the cat might have sat on. And in this case, it knows it's the mat. Now, it might think that could be just cat. So it could be the cat sat on the cat. And there's a small possibility of that. And so sometimes when you ask that question, it might deliver that output. The cat sat on the cat. Just because the word cat often follows the word the, and it knows that. So it goes, well, let's predict this. So that's how you get these sort of strange responses out of AI. But most of the time it's going to go, oh, okay, the cat sat on a mat. Right, okay, so the cat sat on the mat is the answer. Once it's learnt through all of these troves of data, and where does it get this data from? We're going to go into a little bit more detail, but one of the things that made generative AI possible on this planet at this time is the internet. We have millions and millions and millions of websites with text on them, images and videos, millions of them. And so the generative AI tools are able to grab those because they're public domain, meaning that anybody can just go and grab them, read them, use them, whatever. You don't need any special permissions to do that. So it grabs that information and it learns on that information. So millions and millions of websites, that's what it takes. And going over that thousands and thousands and thousands of times until it can accurately predict what the next word, sentence, and page might be. It then goes into fine tuning. So fine tuning is when it's done that whole learning process, it's ingested the millions and millions of pages of information and millions of images and millions of videos. That's all been ingested. So fine tuning then is where a person or another type of computer program can then adjust the responses based on what we expect to see. So that might be adding a bias into it. Maybe that's a political bias or a scientific bias or something that is specific to what we want to run that large language model on. Fine tuning it might mean taking that large language model and giving it just our company documents, maybe our policy letters or that sort of thing. So what we want to do is give it the right pieces of information that are going to fine tune it, give it a little bit more information about this and tell it that on this particular response, we want it to lean in this direction or tell us about this thing. We might fine tune it so it's more prone to give us answers about Australia, for example. Linda's asked a question, which is, does AI have access to secure data? No, not directly, unless we give it access, is the answer. But I might go into that a little bit more, a little bit further in this webinar. So in this way, an LLM can produce results specific to your data set using what it knows about sentence structure and being understood. So you might have, for example, within your company, a particular way of speaking or a particular method of understanding things, and you want it to learn that. So it has the tone or the voice of your business. Maybe you want it to sound conservative, and so you can fine tune it to sound conservative. Maybe you want it to sound like a 20-year-old on TikTok. So you can fine tune it to sound like that. That's what fine tuning is about. Okay, so now let's get into the interesting stuff. How might a large language model and AI use your data? Okay, so one of the great advances that's made LLMs, large language models, as capable as they are, is its access to the vast troves of data. Everything publicly available on the internet. And I said that all of that stuff's publicly available. You don't need permission. That's still, there's some of that still being settled in courts. But as it stands right now, those AI tools have already ingested all of that information. That cat is out of the bag, so to speak. In order to become better, the AI tools need more data. So there is this incredible race going on right now in the world. That race is who is going to have the best AI tools that are going to sound the most human-like. In fact, the goal of all of the companies, all of the large corporates that are aiming for this is something called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. And artificial general intelligence is defined as something which can, in some aspect, be human-like or more than human-like. So we're going for something that can deliver a response exactly the same as you or I can. So right now, the tools on the market don't deliver a completely human-like response. It's similar, and we can sort of feel like it is, but we still know it's an AI. So imagine a tool, and this is complete science fiction, of course, that can sound and act completely human-like and is indistinguishable. You wouldn't be able to tell. That's artificial general intelligence, AGI, and you'll hear that term around a lot as well. So that's like the holy grail. This is what OpenAI and Meta and Google and Microsoft and a few other players are going for in the market. And then, of course, the question is, once you achieve that, you would apparently be achieving something that can think and learn by itself. It doesn't need human interaction at all. So is that alive? Is that something that needs to be treated as sentient at that point? So that's the question. So in order to do this, the thinking is we've taken it this far using the millions and millions of pages on the internet that are available. The only way to make it better at that is more data, more data, more data, more data. Where do we get that more data from? Because we've already ingested everything that's available publicly on the internet. And that really is the question. Here's some things that you might find interesting. Which I think I knew about at the time, but didn't seem quite as significant as it does right now today. I remember hearing probably 15 years ago, I think, that Google had a project of digitizing all of the books in the world. And you might think, what an incredible project. They would literally scan them in, and using a computer tool would turn that into a digital text that can then be ingested and then searched and used. And I thought at the time, how nice are Google doing this so that the world's scholars can use all of these millions of books that are available? And it turns out that Google might not have been doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They might have been doing this because they knew all along that the company that wins the AI race is the one that has the most data available to them. So they digitized all of these books, incredible amount of work, and then used that information to teach their AI models, their large language models. Incredible. This was happening 15 years ago. Another thing which you might know about is the capture tools, which we've all used. So the capture is, or one version of the capture, is when you go to log into a website and it says, prove that you're not a computer or prove that you're not a robot. And then there's an image and it says, pick out the bicycles or pick out the stop signs or pick out the sidewalks in this image. And you have to click on the boxes. Turns out that wasn't actually necessary. Like the Google capture tool works perfectly well without that. It works in the background, and it works on a bunch of factors that are unknown to you and I to detect if you're actually a bot or not. So those images that were there were actually being used to teach their generative AI model. What does a bicycle look like? Here's part of a wheel of a bicycle. How can we understand that that's actually a bicycle? Here's a stop sign. Can we pick that stop sign every time? And what we were doing was fine-tuning that model. So the model had already gone, okay, I think in this square, and this square is a stop sign. Let's now throw this image to 10,000 users on the internet and see if they agree with me. And if they all agree, or most of them agree, because some people get it wrong, most of them agree, then okay, we know our computer model is working. So that's the purpose. That's what that whole capture tool was there for. It was to teach an AI model. It wasn't to actually see if you're a robot or not. Incredible, but true. How might an AI tool use your model? Okay, so we've already discussed this. There's an enormous amount of money and power available. So the company that produces the best AI that is closest to human thinking, AGI. You might be right if you think something undisclosed might go on. I tried to word this as nicely as I could, because far be it from me to cast aspersions on a large corporate. I don't want to do that, and I definitely don't want to get sued. But we all know that if those things have been happening in the past, then they're fairly, they're not going to hurt you. You know, someone digitizing a book or presenting you with a capture image, then you might go, okay, they're not so bad, but we can extrapolate that. We can go, well, what might happen in the future? Do you know what I mean? Like what things might occur. We've all seen enough science fiction movies to know that the future is always dystopian. Might not necessarily be true because we all like that in our science fiction, but it's something to be vigilant of. It's something to be aware of. If these companies need more and more data, and your privacy may be less important to them than generating this artificial general intelligence. Something to think about. So given that you might not have known how LLMs were learning, like you didn't know that about the books, you didn't know that about the capture, what might they be doing today that we don't know about? I don't want to get all conspiratorial on everybody, and I don't want you to go down any rabbit holes on this, but this is something to just think about and be aware of. What's the risk? So we're all putting information into these tools. We're asking it questions. We're providing it with bits of information about ourselves and about our work and about things that we're doing. Is this safe? For example, if I have a document on my screen and I ask an AI tool, summarize this document for me, it's got to ingest that information. It's got to read that information in order to provide a summary. What happens with the information that it ingests? That's the question that we're asking today. The generative AI tool isn't able to distinguish if something is highly secure or is a proprietary piece of information unless you tell it. So if I say to the tool, I want you to review this document that I have on the screen, but I want you to ignore all of the names. Now, maybe it does that, maybe it doesn't, but at least you've told it the names are private, don't look at those. And the very best corporates who are using generative AI will have this built in. It's not a question. It's not a part of the prompt. It's just it removes the names or the personal information before it goes anywhere near the generative AI model, just for this exact reason. And maybe we're being a little bit more scared and concerned about this than we need to be, but I think it's better to err on the side of caution, if you know what I mean. So a programmer, that is someone, a computer programmer, who's instructing the large language model on what to do with a piece of information might not specify what to do with the information. So we have to think about that ourselves. This is very, very important, in particular if you're using a large language model, generative AI, in a business setting. And I'm sorry, Linda, I will get to your questions, but I'll just run through maybe some of what I have here because I might be able to answer some of it for you before we get to the end. Okay, risks. So when a large corporate says, we promise not to use your data to teach our LLM, should you believe them? That's a question you're going to have to answer for yourself. But if you're not sure, or possibly they might, then you have to understand what the risk is. Your data might show up in someone else's results. I'm not saying it definitely is. If you have a PDF and you ask the Adobe PDF reader to summarize that PDF, is it going to take that information and use it to teach its models? We don't know. We actually don't know. They will probably tell you no, but we might not believe them. And that would be up to us. And we should be concerned. We should be cautious about that. I asked Gemini, which is one of the generative AI tools that's available. This one's run by Google, so it's definitely one of the bigger ones. I asked it the question of, what would you do with information? This is what it said. The field of large language model development is rapidly evolving, and the way they utilize, meaning all of them, the way they utilize prompt data to learn and adapt is an active area of research. It's likely that future iterations of LLMs will become even more sophisticated in their ability to learn from prompts, leading to more accurate, relevant, and personalized responses. So that sort of answers the question. The LLM itself is saying, hey, yes, there is definitely a possibility of it. There's definitely a possibility that we might use your responses to either fine-tune or learn further. And if the LLM itself is saying that, then I think we can be reasonably certain that there's cause to be, somewhat concerned about that. Okay, what do we do about it? How do we solve it? Don't put proprietary information or personal information into a prompt or provide to an LLM for further learning. I think this is sort of obvious based on everything that we've said. If you have information which is private and personal to you or your company, don't put it into the large language model. Don't put it into a prompt. Just don't use those tools. You don't know what's happening with the information. Second one is don't use off-the-shelf generative AI tools in a business setting where it may have access to information. And I know it can be like, you might think, but these tools really help me. They help me to write emails. They help me to generate things that I use, to write a report for my boss or something like that. Absolutely, that's understood. And we want to be able to use these tools, but we also have to trust them first and foremost. You wouldn't, for example, take a contract that you have with a client and post it on Facebook, would you? But you might be doing that with a generative AI tool. You just don't know. Is the information you provide over here today going to be used by somebody else over there tomorrow? You just don't know. So you have to have that caution. There's a number of ways around this. So the first one is only use tools that are enterprise grade. So an enterprise grade tool will have information on their website and part of their product disclosure information that will tell you that the information is encrypted when it's moving from your machine to their cloud processor and back, or it happens only on your machine. So there's encryption that's happening. They might also remove names and proprietary information out of the prompt before it gets transmitted to a more public model. Enterprise tools will also have some guarantees around what they do with the information. Now, you might still be skeptical of that, but that's probably important. Like knowing what happens with that information, knowing where it goes is super important. So have a look at that. Have a look at the tiers of what's available in your tools as you're purchasing them or licensing them month to month. have a look at what's available. You're probably going to be looking at the more expensive versions, and they're going to be the enterprise versions. But that's what you need if you're using it in a company setting. If it's not in a company setting, then for sure use the off-the-shelf ones, use the free tools that are available, all of that, but just be aware of what might be happening with your information. The best solution, and this is available, this is something which is possible, is to host your own large language model and fine-tune it yourself. I'm saying large language model, it might be smaller than the large language model. So it might be a medium-sized language model, which is a thing. And I'm going to give you an example here of the architecture of how this might work. So you can self-host a large language model. When you self-host a large language model, you're taking what's been learned, that neural network, and you're placing it in your own environment. So you see I've got this large security layer here, which we're going to build up in a second, but there's a large security layer. That security layer is personal to you. It's walled off. It's a walled garden that only you have access to. So your self-hosted LLM is in there. It has access directly to your media store, which might include documents, it might include video, it might include other types of text. So that's all in your own media store, and you've used that to fine-tune your self-hosted LLM. To that, we connect on the application platform, the actual back-end code for your application. So here I've got application code ROR, meaning Ruby on Rails, one type of back-end code that you might want to use, which connects directly to your company database and to the front-end code, which could also be Ruby on Rails or it could be something else. So that is all separate from the large language model that's being used, but it can access and ask it directly. It's all part of your security layer. So it's all within that environment. And then outside of that sits your users or your admin staff or whoever else using their phones or their desktop computers. So that's how you can wall it off. So at no point does the information leave your secure environment. At no point does it go outside to a hosted LLM elsewhere. Everything sits within your control. And that's the way to do it. We did something like this recently with a company called Colaris, who needed to ingest a large number of emails that would come in overnight, and they needed to translate that into a database, a table. The emails that came in, unformatted, no common threads between them, except the information they needed was all in the email somewhere. So we devised a large language model that could read and understand the emails, input it into a database. So the application itself sits on Heroku, which is a platform that you can use to host your applications. The large language model is sitting on an AWS Bedrock. So that's a tool in AWS that you can host a large language model on, and the data itself is in S3. That's a storage solution also in AWS. So those things sit together in AWS. The application in Heroku then queries the information where it sends it back into Heroku, and then it's available for the staff to use. It's all within the secure boundary, and there's no point where the information leaves the control of Colaris. So there's they don't have to have security concerns about it. That's all walled and protected. So that's an example of a business-ready application. All right, I think I've probably talked enough. Let's do some Q&A, huh? Let's. Is there any questions? I know we're sort of running kind of late here. You know, I've talked a lot, of course. But are there any questions that anybody has? About anything that we've gone over today? Well, Deborah asked earlier, do you think that the Gemini response could also have been influenced? Yes, absolutely. The Gemini response could have been influenced. There's no doubt about it. And you have to have a concern about anything that comes up in your large language model, generative AI responses, that there could be some influence. That's that fine-tuning point that I was talking about earlier. There is always a question about it, and you have to use your own understanding and make sure that when you when you get the result, you have to interpret it yourself, and you should probably check it yourself as well. All right, Linda asked a question as well, which is this: is there a downside to having super intelligent AI? It's really hard to say, but super intelligent AI, if it's smarter than we are as humans, I mean, you can think about that for yourself. There are some people that would say that that is extremely beneficial to us as a species, as mankind, that it means that we can go on to bigger and better things as mankind. We can put our energies into research that hasn't been done yet. We can put our energies into maybe exploring the universe outside of Earth. We can do all those sorts of things. There are then people who would say that having super intelligent AI would surpass us as humans, and the super intelligent AI then would not consider humans necessary anymore. So they're the opposing sides. I'll give you a great example though of how AI, intelligent AI, can be very, very useful. In the early days of AI, and I'm talking only 3 or 4 years ago, there was, I think this is at Harvard, but I could stand corrected on this, where a team input a bunch of information about how antibiotics work into a computer, and also the process that they use to test antibiotics. So as you know, there is a continual battle between the bacteria and the antibiotics that we have. The antibiotics have to continually get better and better and better, because as we use an antibiotic for a certain period of time, the bacteria, or some bacteria, can become immune to that, and they become super bacteria. And so we have to get better and better antibiotics. So it's an ongoing thing that happens continuously. So a bunch of information was input, and in this case, the generative AI came out with a molecule that it had internally tested using its own test criteria that was an extraordinary antibacterial agent, like quite extraordinary. And it would never have been found at the rate that humans test these antibacterials. So in that case, that was an incredible result. And that is in use today, and it saves lives today. So that's an example. Another question from Linda. Cost-wise, what are we looking at to implement your own AI? Sorry, that question's not coming up on your screen, but that's the question. Cost-wise, what we'll be looking at to implement your own AI. It's not overly expensive, in the range of hundreds of dollars per month, which is appropriate for any business setting. And for the peace of mind, it's absolutely correct. Another question is, hopefully this one comes up on your screen. Nope, it's not coming up. That's all right. Does the Clara system have ongoing learning, or is it only done once? Yeah, that major learning only needs to be done one time, because really all it is actually fine tuning. So the large language model has already done the learning. We're fine tuning it on the emails that we have, and no, it doesn't have to be redone unless somebody says, hey, I now need it to pick up this piece of information, or here's something that I think we might need in the future. So then we have to teach it that, or some different aspect of something like that hadn't been thought of before. Otherwise, no, it only has to be done the one time. We don't have to re-teach it continuously. All right, good. Thank you very much for all of those questions. We're definitely over time on our webinar today. I am very interested to know about any webinars that you want to hear about in the future, anything that you might find interesting. Our next webinar is going to be on the subject of the ethical use of AI. And at the same time, I think we'll produce a series of videos that just explain the basics of what AI is and how it works, like some of those terms that we went into at the start of this webinar, and just going into those in a little bit more detail. So we'll do a series on that. But the next one is definitely the ethical use of AI. If there's anything else that you're interested in, or anything else that you want to hear about, please tell me. please send me an email or drop a line. I think everybody's got my details from the emails that you received going into this. And if you have any feedback or any questions that you have, please let me know. We'll send out a copy of this deck and the video to everybody who attended today as well, so you can go over that. And if any questions come up later, please ask. So thanks everybody for attending today. Bye.